In this episode, we're going to spend time on two areas that can quietly undermine a strong security program if they are treated as afterthoughts: wireless connectivity and remote access. These topics sound simple on the surface because most people have used Wi-Fi and have signed in remotely for work or support at some point. But in a payment environment, they behave like multipliers for risk. Wireless extends your network beyond your walls, and remote access extends your environment beyond your direct control. So weak design choices tend to spread farther and faster than you expect. For a brand new learner, the key is not to memorize a list of settings, but to build the mental model of why these are weak link areas and what it means to validate them as part of a PCI QSA assessment. You want to learn how to look at the environment with the eyes of an attacker while still thinking like an auditor who needs clear, defensible evidence. By the end, you should have a simple framework for spotting gaps, asking better questions, and avoiding the common traps that make wireless and remote access controls look good on paper but fail in real life. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Wireless tends to create weak links because it breaks the usual assumption that a network boundary is mostly physical and predictable. A wired switch port is inside a building and usually requires being near the cable, but a wireless signal can leak into a parking lot, a neighboring suite, or a public hallway, and it does not care where the walls are. That changes what it means to be inside the network because you can be outside the facility and still interact with internal systems if wireless is misconfigured. In a payment environment, that matters because even if cardholder data does not traverse wireless, a compromised wireless entry point can be used as a stepping stone into systems that do. The validation mindset starts with the idea that wireless is not automatically unsafe, but it must be deliberately designed so that joining it does not grant a shortcut into sensitive networks. When you validate wireless, you are validating the story the organization tells itself about who can join, what they can reach, and how quickly the organization would notice if something changed. The weak link is usually not one setting, but the gap between the intended design and the messy reality of how wireless actually gets deployed, expanded, and supported over time. A practical way to think about wireless validation is to separate the concepts of allowed wireless and unmanaged wireless, because both can exist at the same time. Allowed wireless includes the access points and controllers the organization knows about and operates, like corporate Wi-Fi for employees or a guest network for visitors. Unmanaged wireless includes anything that can create a signal without approval, like a rogue access point plugged into a wall jack, a consumer router someone brought from home, a mobile hotspot acting as a bridge, or even a printer that offers its own Wi-Fi feature. For a QSA, the question is not only whether the approved wireless is configured securely, but also whether there is a process to detect and respond to the unmanaged wireless that will eventually appear. This is where beginners often misunderstand the goal and assume a policy statement is enough, when in reality validation needs to show that the environment has a living capability to discover and correct drift. Drift is what happens when today's network is slightly different than last month's, and nobody updates diagrams, inventories, or monitoring. Wireless is famous for drift because it is easy to add and easy to forget, and that combination is exactly what attackers like. When you look at allowed wireless, the core security idea is to make joining the wireless network require strong proof of identity, and to make that identity meaningfully tied to a person or a managed device. You want a situation where an attacker cannot simply guess a shared password and be treated like a legitimate user. Even when strong wireless security is in place, validation is about confirming the organization can demonstrate it, not just claim it. Evidence is usually a combination of configuration artifacts, operational records, and observation of how access is granted and revoked. The deeper reason this matters is that wireless is often treated as convenience infrastructure, and convenience systems are where shortcuts appear, like shared credentials, long-lived access that never gets reviewed, and informal exceptions that become permanent. A strong validation approach includes confirming that wireless access is segmented appropriately, meaning wireless users do not land directly on networks that host cardholder data environments. You are not trying to prove wireless is perfect. You are trying to prove it is not the backdoor that defeats all the careful work done elsewhere. Another important part of wireless validation is understanding what the wireless network is used for, because purpose shapes risk. A guest network that only provides internet access is fundamentally different from an internal wireless network that can reach administrative systems, and both are different from wireless used for operational technology like scanners, handheld devices, or kiosks. Beginners sometimes assume the technical label matters most, like guest versus corporate, but the real question is reachability and trust. Reachability means what can be contacted from that wireless network, and trust means what the environment assumes about someone just because they are connected. If a wireless device can reach internal systems, then the wireless network is not merely a convenience service. It is a real access path into the business. Validation means confirming that segmentation is enforced by network controls, not by assumptions, and that the organization can show what paths exist. This is also a place where misunderstandings happen around the phrase out of scope, because people may say wireless is out of scope while still allowing wireless devices to reach systems that influence the in-scope environment. The weak link appears when the wireless network is treated as separate, but it is not actually separated. Now shift to remote access, which creates weak links for a different reason. It often brings high privilege into the environment from places you cannot control. Remote access is not only employees working from home, but also vendors, support teams, managed service providers, and administrators who need access after hours. The risk comes from the combination of distance, identity, and urgency. Distance means the user is not physically present, so you cannot rely on physical security controls. Identity means you must trust the sign-in process more than you trust a badge at a door. Urgency means remote access is often used during incidents or outages, and urgency is when people bypass controls to get the job done. When you validate remote access, you are validating that security does not collapse when someone is stressed, tired, or in a hurry, because attackers count on that moment. For a QSA, remote access is also a place where third-party responsibility blurs, and blurred responsibility is another type of weak link. A healthy way to break remote access down is to think in terms of who, what, where, and how. Who is connecting includes employees and non-employees, and validation should show that identities are individual and not shared across a group. What they are connecting to includes not just servers, but management interfaces, payment applications, jump hosts, and anything that can change system state. Where they are connecting from includes corporate devices, personal devices, and unknown networks, and the level of trust should change based on that origin. How they connect includes the remote access technology and the authentication approach, and validation focuses on whether the method enforces strong authentication and controlled authorization. Authorization is a separate idea from authentication, and beginners often combine them. Authentication proves you are who you say you are, while authorization decides what you are allowed to do after you prove it. Weak remote access frequently happens when authentication is decent, but authorization is too broad, so once someone gets in, they can go everywhere. One of the strongest protections for remote access is making access both time-bound and purpose-bound, meaning it is granted for specific reasons and it does not last forever by default. Many organizations claim they do this, but validation looks for the operational reality. Do accounts for vendors get disabled when projects end, or do they remain active for years because nobody wants to break support? Are elevated privileges granted only when needed, or do administrators permanently hold powerful roles because it is convenient? A QSA is trying to determine whether the environment has a pattern of least privilege and a mechanism of review, not just a good intention. For beginners, it helps to imagine a remote user account as a key that can be copied infinitely. If you lose track of how many keys exist, who has them, and which doors they open, you are no longer managing access. You are hoping access behaves. Validation is about replacing hope with evidence that access is controlled, reviewed, and reversible. Remote access also intersects heavily with logging and monitoring because the environment needs to be able to reconstruct what happened after a remote session occurs. This matters for PCI assessments because the organization must be able to show that administrative access is not anonymous and not invisible. The weak link is when remote access is permitted but not observed, so the organization cannot distinguish legitimate work from malicious activity. Validation means confirming that remote access events can be tied to a specific user and that those events are captured in a way that supports investigation. A beginner-friendly way to think about this is to imagine you are watching a replay of the environment's history. If a configuration changed and the payment application stopped working, could you identify which remote account performed the change, from where, and at what time? If the answer is no, the environment is operating with blind spots. Those blind spots are attractive to attackers because they allow them to move without being seen, and they are also risky for the business because they make troubleshooting slow and uncertain. Wireless and remote access share a hidden connection. Both are places where convenience can override design discipline, and design discipline is what keeps a payment environment predictable. Predictability is a security asset because it makes it easier to notice anomalies. If wireless access points appear without a process, or remote access accounts are created ad hoc without review, the environment becomes hard to reason about. Attackers do not need you to be completely insecure. They just need you to be inconsistent. Validation is about consistency, not perfection. You look for repeatable processes such as inventories, approvals, periodic checks, and documented ownership. Ownership is important because if nobody owns wireless discovery, it will not happen, and if nobody owns vendor access reviews, they will get skipped. A QSA often spends time mapping ownership to outcomes, because when responsibility is vague, controls degrade. For a beginner, one of the best habits is to always ask who maintains this control over time, not who set it up initially. A classic misconception in this area is thinking that a single strong control makes the whole access path strong. For example, people may say wireless is secure because it uses strong encryption, but then they use the same credentials across many users or fail to separate wireless from sensitive networks. Others may say remote access is safe because it uses multi-factor authentication, but then they allow remote users to connect directly to administrative interfaces from anywhere, at any time, with broad privileges. In both cases, the weak link is not the marquee feature. It is the missing supporting controls around it. Validation teaches you to look at the entire chain, how access is requested, how it is approved, how identity is verified, how privileges are granted, how sessions are logged, how anomalies are detected, and how access is removed. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and wireless and remote access chains tend to have many links. The goal is not to demand excessive controls that harm the business, but to ensure the controls that exist are coherent and cover the entire access story. When you can tell a coherent story backed by evidence, weak links are much harder to hide. To make these ideas concrete without turning into a configuration lecture, imagine two simple scenarios. In the first scenario, an employee brings a small wireless router to make their corner office Wi-Fi better, plugs it into a network port, and forgets about it when they move desks. In the second scenario, a vendor's support account is created to troubleshoot a payment issue, and it stays active long after the contract ends because nobody wants to risk losing support access. Neither scenario requires a sophisticated attacker, and neither begins with malicious intent. Yet both create a bridge into the environment that bypasses planned controls. Validation asks whether the organization would detect that forgotten wireless device or would notice that vendor account still exists months later. It also asks whether the organization would have clear steps to disable them quickly without confusion. These scenarios illustrate why policies alone are not enough. You need operational routines that keep the environment aligned with its intended design. A QSA's job is to verify those routines exist and are effective. As you think like a QSA, it also helps to notice the types of evidence that feel strong versus weak, even at a beginner level. Strong evidence tends to be current, repeatable, and tied to actual operations, like inventories that match reality, review records with dates and approvers, and logs that show activity in a way that can be traced to individuals. Weak evidence tends to be vague, outdated, or purely declarative, like a policy that says wireless is prohibited without any method of discovery, or a statement that remote access is monitored without examples of what is reviewed. Validation is not about distrust for its own sake. It is about making sure the environment can withstand the kinds of pressure that real operations create. Pressure is when a store opens early and a device needs support before staff arrive, or when a network change is rushed for a business deadline, or when a help desk is overloaded and reuses an account to save time. These are normal business moments that can quietly create weak links. A good validation approach proves that the environment's controls hold up under normal pressure, not only under ideal conditions. When you put it all together, the phrase "without weak links" is really a reminder to look for the hidden shortcuts created by convenience and time. Wireless should not be a shadow network that bypasses segmentation, and it should not be impossible to inventory and detect when something new appears. Remote access should not be a permanent backdoor for vendors or administrators, and it should not be difficult to prove who did what when. The big picture skill for a beginner is to see access paths as living systems that change over time, not as static diagrams. Systems that change need governance, and governance needs visibility, ownership, and routine checks. If you remember nothing else, remember that wireless and remote access expand the environment's reach beyond its physical boundaries, and that expansion must be matched by stronger identity, stricter authorization, and better monitoring. When those elements are in place and can be demonstrated with clear evidence, the weak links get replaced by controlled, predictable access that supports the business without opening doors to avoidable risk.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.